And first on the agenda are public appearances, but it appears that we have no public appearances. Okay. Second item is approval of the minutes, but since the minutes were distributed at 4:30, we have decided to wait so people are sure to have enough time to review those, and we will be moving ahead on that item. And so then we are on to agenda item 4 already, moving along very quickly. I hope Kate gets here before we're done. Okay, I like that. Then I am going to turn it over to Jen for our discussion topic and presentation on the human resources strategy and compensation.
All right, thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. If our team can please come on up to the table. You have the HR team here in force tonight, along with Mike Berry, who's going to help out a little bit if there are some financial questions. I'm going to let those guys introduce themselves. I think that's a good idea. I think you've met Rochelle and Abby before, but we'll do thorough introductions just to make sure. But before I pass it over to them, I want to remind the board that, as Mike likes to call it, it's Ideas Month. Big Idea Month. Pre-budget work. Last week we had a session on staffing where we talked about some big ideas. What might we do to improve staffing strategically to support our staff in doing their best work. And today is really part 2. We're just taking another look at what might be possible in our district, and we're going to look at compensation. As I mentioned, we're going to look at all of HR with a kind of a zoom in on compensation. As I mentioned last week, the bulk of our budget, 85% give or take, is about people, right? It's the number of people that we have on staff and how much we pay them. So I appreciate, and I hope everyone does, that what we're talking about this month constitutes the vast majority of our budget decisions. So we need to take them, and I know we will, take them very seriously. So I'm going to pass over to Deirdre. She's going to give you an overview and some updates on HR generally, and as I said, the bulk of our meeting today will be zooming in on one particular part of the HR puzzle, compensation. All right, Deirdre.
So before we jump in, I'll just let Abby and Rochelle introduce themselves, and then we'll dive in.
Hi, I'm Abby Brabeck, Director of Hiring.
Oh, excuse me. Please slow down. Say that again.
Yeah. Abby Brabeck, Director of Hiring.
And I'm Rochelle Haiti, Director of Benefits.
One last thing that I should have mentioned, in Deirdre's presentation, she has a few places where she's planning to pause and open it up for questions, and just because of the sheer content of this meeting, we're hoping that we can wait until those moments to open it up for discussion. Clearly, if there's a quick clarifying question, we're happy to take it, but we want to save the meatier discussion for those key discussion points.
TJ has a point.
Just one question now that early in the presentation, there's the things on the affirmative action plan, and then the affirmative action plan is a separate agenda item. So how do we want to deal with that?
I would say is the question around affirmative action policy and planning with regard to this, or is it on the actual policy itself? The document, yes.
I think it's more on the policy, and I guess the question was whether, how we were going to go back to that was the question.
Yeah, if it's on the document itself, then let's wait for that.
Yeah, just to add further context to that, TJ, we're using the affirmative action plan to share the goals that we've accomplished and the HR goals specifically that have offered and given us the opportunity to exceed those benchmarks. So that's how we're kind of framing what we're reporting out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Just wanted to make
Yeah. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be before the board to share a lot of work that the HR team has done in the last 3 years. We've been on a journey of transformation since the adoption of the strategic framework. And much of this has been very rewarding and challenging at the same time. So as Jen mentioned, the purpose of the presentation is to really go through a couple of things. We want to share some work that the HR team has done specifically. We want to align that to the affirmative action data and also share some accomplishments, and then really get into the heart of the compensation salary discussion. And we're hoping that we can spend the bulk of the time specifically in that area. So it's our vision to cultivate a work environment that attracts and develops and retains top talent for the students and the families that we serve. So we organize our work to realize this vision through this employee life cycle. So there are a lot of activities that we're doing in each one of these areas that we believe is going to help us transform our department and serve our teachers, staff, and students better. So this employee life cycle is essentially kind of our working theory of action. Again, if we can achieve the elements that are within this employee life cycle, we can accomplish the vision of a thriving workforce. So in addition to sharing some of the highlights, the two big focus areas, again, are around the compensation strategy and some information specific to the technology updates that we want to share.
Distracted by the fact that Dean is
Not at all. It's okay.
It does appear plugged in.
No, let's let Dean get them and you guys get yourself set.
Okay, you may not affirm, we have no water in the building, so we can't use the restroom.
It's ill-advised to use the restroom right now.
Sorry, you didn't hear.
Oh, well. Okay. So everybody limit your water and beverage consumption during this meeting? Yeah. Okay. So back on track here.
Segue.
So, right.
So no lead in the water either.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm going to try to bring this back. So as we... oh my God. All right. So as we aspire to diversify our workforce so that it more closely mirrors the students and the demographics we serve, we have a set of guiding principles that really ground us in that work. So I want to point out that you received a summary document that is more comprehensive of all of the HR accomplishments and the future focus areas for this year and beyond. So this employee life cycle is really meant to remind you of that and ground us as we look at some of the affirmative action data. So we wanted to share just a couple of highlights from the affirmative action data to help you kind of have some insight into how it is that we use that data as baseline, but also how it connects to our more aggressive goals in HR specifically. So we just picked a couple of data points that we wanted to share. You obviously have the full report at your disposal. So one of the areas of focus for us, again, is diversifying our workforce. So staff of color was a data point that we wanted to share. So you're looking at the affirmative action plan goals specific to staff of color. And really the good news here is that we have exceeded the baseline benchmark. So for every group within this set, we've hired more staff of color than we did 5 years ago. So this is really sharing and showing that we've exceeded the availability, which is the black line, and the utilization, which is that farther percentage mark in every category. And then if we look at the affirmative action plan goals by gender, still pretty good news in the sense that in most of these groups, again, we're exceeding the benchmark. The two or three areas that I want to call out specifically is the area where we have the custodial maintenance and trades utilization numbers specifically. And if you notice, we've kind of done a backslide in that particular data point. And we attribute some of this to the fact that we know that there have been 3 resignations, female resignations within this particular job unit. And in the other 2 areas, which is the educational assistant area and the teacher area, we expected to see the availability number essentially be right-sized, right? So we intentionally hired more male EAs and more male teachers, and that's why we see a little bit more in terms of right-sizing there. So previously we had more female teachers, previously we had more female EAs, and we're seeing that shift, which was definitely an intentional focus on our part. So when we look at the hire and separation of staff by color, although we see a slight dip in the hires and also the same dip in separations, it is important for you to just pay attention to the teal line, which is showing the continued upward trend. And we believe that with the hires and separations across the trend going down, that we've made strides in the culture and climate work, slowing down the turnover for staff of color. So that's really the takeaway that we have with this particular data point. Moving on to the hire and separation by gender. Again, if we're focusing on the teal line, we expected to see that the female staff composition would change slightly as we put a focus on hiring male teachers of specifically of color, male teachers and male teachers of color, and male educational assistants. Some of the 2016-17 outcomes. So this provides a snapshot of some of the accomplishments, including our benefit area. So we wanted to call out that we continue to support the graduates in our Grow Our Own program. We had 2 graduates that were placed in MMSD this last year. We've hired 81 new teachers of color, and we still continue to have a focus on increasing that percentage of male teachers as well. So going from 88 in 16-17 to 113 in this last hiring cycle. And finally, taking a look at the 17-18 goals that we've set both in our hiring and benefit areas, you'll see that we have a continued focus on diversifying the workforce and providing supports that improve engagement and retention. I'd like to specifically call out the increase in new teacher hires of color. We realize that this is certainly an aggressive stretch goal, but we do believe it is something that is attainable. When we look at the number of teachers of color that we've hired over the past few years, and if we had an intentional focus taking a look at the turnover and hiring at a 25% rate every year, and that's building on the previous year's number, that there's an opportunity for us to realize our goal of diversifying our workforce so that it more closely matches the students that we serve in about 6 years. So I'm going to pause there to see if there are questions and comments for this portion of the presentation.
TJ?
Yeah, 2 questions that are, one of them's kind of technical questions, actually. When we're counting hires and separations, how are teachers who are on emergency licenses who would, at the end of their 1-year contract, I assume that that there's not an automatic renewal, they're not on a multi-year contract, and then if they are still on emergency license and are hired back, does that count as a hire and a separation? Do they count as an external hire, an internal hire?
So no, we would not have, if they've separated completely from the district, they've turned in their resignation and they're no longer working, that is what we would consider a separation.
So if they're, my understanding, I know that they come on the Human Resources report if they were working last year and under an emergency license, they come back as a new hire on the human resources report. I mean, I've seen it happen. And so I'm not sure how that fits in the statistics.
Yeah, I don't actually think that's accurate.
Unless I can show you, not here and now.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But I can identify 2 or 3 people who I noticed on a human resources report, and I know that they were previous as a new hire, and I know that they were previously employed under an emergency license.
Okay, we can certainly take a look at that. We don't typically consider folks that have, unless they've officially resigned and left the organization. That is how we count.
It's possible that those 2 or 3 cases were that, but
yeah.
I can. And then the second question is also kind of the goal here for 100% hires by July 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at the monthly reports we get, and those reports are they're generally issued like the 10th of the month, or is what we get.
Yep.
It seems to me that we do a large percentage of our hiring currently appears on the July report, which would be between June 10th and July 10th, and then on the August report, which would be between July 10th and August 10th.
Yeah.
What's
So
what's a sense of that's just kind of like just eyeballing these, that it seems to me that those are the 2 big ones.
Yeah. So I could say 2 things. Like we continue to want for our timelines to be moved up earlier. So as we look at when it is that workbooks go out and how the allocation process works, moving that timeline up earlier, we always aspire to having those positions filled as soon as we possibly can. So when we look at the 100%, based on what we know in April, all of the known vacancies, we should be able to attain that. It's not taking into consideration the late resignations that you might see as they continue to trickle through throughout the summer. So we wouldn't necessarily have all of our positions filled by July 1, but that's what we definitely aspire to. And again, it's going to be difficult for us if we continue to have our resignations late, which is another area of focus, and certainly one that we want to dig into.
And just one more thing on the resignations.
Yeah.
How much of that is shuffling, that if a teacher applies for a job at a different school and then that creates an opening, and that's not a late resignation but rather a shuffle or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, and
is that a big factor, or is that a small factor?
It is a factor, but when we're talking about resignations, we're literally talking about people that that are leaving the district. Yes, we typically know pretty far in advance the folks that are shuffling around, right? Like we've got a pretty good handle on that process, but the late resignations are really truly people that are leaving the district.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Nikki?
By teachers, you mean classroom teachers, or do you mean administrators, support staff, or just teachers?
Teachers.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Moving on. Okay, so back to this lovely graph we have here, this lovely picture. We want to now shift focus to the 2 more foundational next steps, which are really looking at the technology aspects and then taking a dive into the compensation. So first we'll tackle the technology strategy. As a reminder, we conducted a compensation study back in 2015 that really surfaced our current technology platforms are not set up for us to support any shifts in compensation, right? So we really do need to take a look at HR technologies. Currently, we have a lot of work that is manual entry, which is time intensive, prone to error. We don't have the ability to really capture historical data the way that we would like to. Workarounds in terms of creating and running reports, how it is that we audit, you get the idea. A lot of improvements need to be made in the area of our technology in order for us to support a real shift in compensation. So when C&J were here, that was their recommendation that we conduct further analysis, which we did these last 2 months with Baker Tilly's support. So we're still working with Baker Tilly to finalize this report, But the following items are some of the findings and recommendations. So they really are encouraging us to take a good look at our current system capabilities and be sure that we cannot work with our existing vendors to build out additional technology supports with what we currently have in terms of our workflow processes. So we're going to certainly work with some of our larger vendors to make sure that they're delivering all of the capabilities that they can for us. There were some specific new technology platforms that they encouraged us to invest in, and that is a new applicant tracking system, a learning management system, and some compensation software. And then it was pretty evident that based on years of kind of changes within the HR department and potentially positions shifting or just not being backfilled, that folks were taking on a lot of roles and responsibilities that may not be necessarily aligned to their particular job title. So a reevaluation of roles and responsibilities. In addition to exploring the current staffing ratio in human resources beyond the recruiter to ensure that we have the right staffing mix to really realize the work that we're trying to do in HR. So I'll pause there to see if there are questions specific to the technology pieces before we jump into compensation. Yes.
Seems though we've been talking about technology in HR for quite some time.
Yeah.
So why is it taking so long to decide on the system? And I don't think there's any real resistance to moving on and adopting some technology and bringing the HR functions up to speed. So
we are glad to hear that, James. We wanted to be sure. We wanted to be sure that we were investing in the right things. We also wanted to be sure that we were aligning what we needed with other departments that work very closely with HR. And so the learning management system is a perfect example of a technology that will be used not only both in HR, but also in the professional development team. So I think the full analysis was for us to be very certain that the money that we were investing was going in the right places.
Yeah.
Baker Tilly is a business business solutions consultant group, and so they essentially came in and spent some time with us, really understanding our HR operations, where we could find efficiencies, what could we retool, and where do we really need to invest in terms of the technology piece. They have a local office, but they're national as well. Yeah.
And James, just as a reminder, the funding for moving forward with the technology systems is in the budget for this year. We made that commitment. It is built into the budget this year. Before spending the money, we wanted to make sure we knew exactly what we needed to purchase. So.
It just still seems like it's taking a long time.
Yeah, agreed.
And do we now know what we need to purchase?
We're about to get the full report from Baker Tilly. We'll share that with you, and then I think the answer
Good question.
is yes. I would hope so. Yeah.
The 3 recommendations there are, I'm not trying to be funny, but I could have gave you these recommendations. Get one off the shelf, buy a customized one, or build your own. Are you leaning towards one of these? Do we have a recommendation of which one of these 3 we should get to?
That slide was that he's looking at what Cross and Joftis initially said that we needed to do.
Yes.
These aren't the recommendations from Baker Tilly.
Correct.
So maybe you can say a little bit about what we'll get from Baker Tilly that'll help inform what we purchase.
Yeah. So again, Baker Tilly did a full assessment of operations, what our current technology is, where we can find efficiencies, et cetera. So in each one of those categories, when there is something specific to technology, they will definitely give us a recommendation that says, we think you should go with this particular applicant tracking system or this particular learning management system based on what we already have as a platform.
Do you want to chime in? No? You're grabbing microphones.
Boy, that was my mistake, wasn't it? I just wanted to mention to James, you might remember Baker Tilly as Virtual Kraus, big accounting firm. They've been bought, and that's why the name changed. But Virtual Kraus has been in Wisconsin and the Upper Midwest for decades. So we know them mostly as a CPA firm. They also have a business consulting firm or arm.
Okay. All right, moving on. Compensation. This is the heart of it right here. Obviously the board knows that we went through this compensation study back in 2015-16, and we really were looking for the study to help us think of ways to improve engagement, support of staff, hiring for diversity, keeping teachers and staff, and ensuring that they had the resources to do their job well. So when we think about total compensation, it's important for us to think about what kind of employer we want to be, and could shifts in compensation better position us to be a place where people want to come and work. So this is really kind of focusing on the attraction and retention elements of what is part of our philosophy and what we think is most important. Okay, so again, our philosophy is really around developing a plan that ensures engagement, support for staff, hiring for diversity, keeping great teachers, and ensuring that they have the resources. We want that to be aligned to a human capital strategy that makes sure that we have the right people doing the right work in the right places. So we really feel like one way for us to begin to kind of further define our future strategy is to redesign our teacher salary schedule. So the compensation study concluded in the 2015-16 school year, and that's essentially where our work began. We brought together a compensation study work group. We engaged the teachers that were a part of that work group, principals, central office staff, to really get feedback on what was important to them as it related to salary and compensation. So we got a lot of information. We spent time over the summer building out these concepts and took all of that feedback from those groups and came up with this big idea. So since October, we've spent time going back to these groups after we kind of built out this big idea to get additional feedback on what we designed. So we feel like the concepts that we're going to share have some general support from those folks that we've engaged. And it's important for you to know that we know this is the beginning of this process, right? We're sharing these concepts with you as a beginning stage. There are some of these concepts that still need to be built out and require some additional work. We've received support from our partners at MTI to continue engaging in this work with us. So we're excited to have the opportunity to build this out. We know this is work that's going to be ongoing from now through March, April, May, so to speak. But we really felt like it was important at this point in time, preview to budget, to really give you guys some insight into what we're thinking. So you have in your packet, I believe, an old schedule that you could use as a frame of reference. And the new structure that we're going to lay out is really built out of the components that we've identified here. Single annual steps, a salary curve, bachelor's and master's only tracks, professional development pay, advanced placement for identified areas, an emerging leader development track, and a teacher leader track. So a lot of components, and I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle to walk us through the details of each component.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to ground ourselves in is that, again, this structure is based off of feedback that we've received from our teachers and your senior leaders. We've approached this work by designing solutions around identified problems. That's the other piece, is that each solution is an identified area that we want to address. I want to spend some time identifying the different concepts of the salary schedule, knowing that they're still in that concept form right now and that there are pieces that will take additional time to build out. So the first piece that I want to talk about are annual steps. The current schedule includes improvement and incentive levels, which prohibit employees from moving along the salary schedule if they don't meet credit requirements. The other piece is that it prohibits part-time employees from moving a full step for their completion of the school year. So our solution is to remove the improvement and incentive levels and allow all teachers to move a full step upon the completion of the school year. And this initial annual investment is approximately $120,000.
So I would just add, just really quickly, as a part of that, it's important to know that when we're talking about annual steps, it's not moving people onto the salary schedule at a particular step, but it's more about moving those, eliminating those half steps and allowing people to move from year to year along those steps, is what this is outlining.
The next piece that I would like to talk about a little bit is the salary curve. Right now, teachers' earning potential is realized later on in their career, usually closer to the end where they are retiring, instead of earlier on when the turnover is higher. And this is an identified area that was brought to our attention during the Cross and Joftis study. So our solution is to implement one of three options of a proposed curve that increases earning potential early on for teachers. And now we're going to look at the three different curve options. This first curve we're calling example 1.0. And I want to acknowledge that this is a really difficult graph to look at and comprehend. The easiest way to view is to look at the top dark blue line, which is the idea of what the curve potentially could look like. Under this example, you can see there's an increase in earnings in years 4 through 15, along with an increase in the curve at the end of an employee's career. This additional bump at the end comes from feedback from MTI and other teachers wanting to realize and acknowledge the work that teachers have farther on in their career. This curve really is partly built off of the recommendation from Cross and Joftis, increasing that early potential early on, along with that little bump at the end, which was more from that feedback. This is the curve that we are moving forward with in the recommendation later on. The next curve is curve 1.1. It's very similar to the first curve that we looked at. It spreads the increased salaries over a longer period of time and slows down at the end. So you will notice the increased curve goes from year 7 through potentially 25 to 27 and then slows down. This is the most expensive curve, costing us $5.1 million. The previous curve would come in at $4.4 million. The last curve that I want to highlight is a curve very similar to what our current structure looks like. It does have a little change where the earning potential is increased through years 10, and then it slows down similar to the curve that we have right now. This curve provides the greatest increase of earnings across the entire teacher salary unit and would cost the district approximately $4.7 million in an investment. I do want to provide some supporting data going into these curve ideas. The first thing I want to highlight is that 50% of our new hires in 2017 to 2018 were in years 0 to 10 for their teaching experience. The majority of our teachers are newer teachers. When we look at our turnover from 2011 to 2016-17, you can see with our 0 to 10 years of experience group, teacher turnover increased from 2.81% in 2010 to 2011 to 6.16% this last year, partially due to the fact that we are hiring more teachers during that early years, but additionally because there are other reasons why they are leaving the school district. In comparison, years 10 through 19 has stayed fairly consistent, and 20 plus years has stayed fairly consistent as well, knowing that those employees from 20 plus years are usually those that are retiring through the school district. So we see that's a little higher than that 10 to 19 year range. The next piece that I want to talk about is our bachelor, master's, and master's plus lanes. Our current schedule includes tracks which prohibit employees from moving along the salary schedule if they do not meet credit requirements. So our solution is to simplify the salary schedule to 3 lanes, correlating to degree attainment, and we want to provide professional development opportunities that better support students and teachers. But I want to call out that by simplifying the schedule, we have heard from teachers that this is a disadvantage to those that are continuing their education. Therefore, we are proposing to bundle this component with the professional development track that we will talk about next. The other piece I want to call out here is that there is not an annual investment identified on this slide. And that is because the annual investment is built into the salary curve, which we just talked about. So let's move on to the professional pay, which we're in essence suggesting to bundle with that bachelor, master, master plus lane. A simplified schedule with 3 tracks and no improvement in incentive levels could be a disadvantage to continuing education and professional development. Therefore, we would like to provide a professional pay band where teachers can take district, accredited college, accredited university, or self-directed credit and receive a salary stipend or bonus for those credits that they have attained. The annual investment we're guessing or estimating as approximately $1 million, which will be offset by some pre-budgeted lane advancement. The concepts that we've just talked about are really foundational concepts that start the build out of a new salary schedule. The next concepts we're going to talk about are additional pieces that we can build upon. This first piece I want to talk about is hard to fill positions. We know there is a shortage of fully licensed cross-categorical special education and bilingual teachers. We're also experiencing high turnover within these areas. We suggest that we advance place these cross-categorical special education and bilingual teachers that are licensed on the salary schedule so that we are more competitive with surrounding school districts in attracting fully licensed staff. And if you look at the annual investment, it does vary based on the curve that we move forward with. Now there are some supporting data points that I'd like to talk about. The first is the turnover. And I want to first state and recognize that these are high demanding and high stress roles, and we want to acknowledge that. If you will see, the average turnover for a teacher right now is 6.8% across MMSD's base. Cross-categorical special education has a turnover of 25% and bilingual of 24%. We understand that this compensation piece that we're looking at is just going to be one piece of the puzzle, and we have to do additional work in the employee engagement in relating to the employee life cycle. So we want to call that out.
So just very simply, we know that the compensation is not the only thing that's going to get at this issue of the turnover, right? We're talking about compensation tonight, so that's where our focus is. But we do understand that we have to dig into this, and we have to understand why we're having such turnover in these areas and really address those issues. But for the purpose of this evening, we're focusing on the compensation piece because we think that is one part of a overall larger strategy. It's not the only answer, but it is one answer. So just to make sure that we're all clear on that.
The second piece I want to talk about is emergency licenses, but I want to give a better definition because when we hear emergency license, it sometimes makes us a little nervous. So that definition has changed. An emergency license is now a 1-year license with the stipulation that they are in a program and working towards their full certification. that these teachers in these emergency licenses most likely already have a teaching degree and they already have a bachelor's degree. So if we look at emergency licenses at MMSD, you can see that cross-CAT special ed increased from 7% to 12%, and bilingual increased from 28% to 44%. And I want to call our attention to this graph, which is a little easier to explain. The first thing I want to do is explain what we're looking at. This shows the total number of employees in cross-CAT and bilingual teaching positions at MMSD. The pieces of the pie show the percentage of those in these positions that are fully licensed and that are on emergency licenses. And I want to highlight, we're doing a great job. If you will notice, the blue section and the yellow section are all of our employees that are licensed. And the green and red are areas where we need to just continue to dig in and move the needle forward. The next piece of the teacher salary schedule is a concept looking at high-need schools. We struggle to recruit and retain teachers in our high-need schools. Therefore, we are looking at or suggesting to increase compensation for teachers working in those high-need schools. And the annual investment we have listed here is $650,000 for 4 schools. And we have some really interesting supporting data. And I want to emphasize that what we are trying to do is find the right balance of stability with students who need the benefit the most. So if you will look, our teaching years of service ranges from about 6 years to almost 17 years, depending on the schools. And if we dig a little further, you will notice the teaching years of service is higher in our highest non-poverty levels and lower in our higher poverty levels or lowest income places. And again, it's not to highlight what is happening. It is highlighting that we need to find more balance to make this more of a straight line instead of a curve. And we believe by incenting through salary that we will see a change in this process.
Excuse me, this one really throws me. I don't get it. Can you interpret this a little? The dots on the left and the dots on the right, what's the difference here?
Yep, the blue dots, the MMSD experience is that teaching experience for those working in the school district, the amount of years they've worked at MMSD. And each dot is a school. So you will notice each school averages between 5 and 17 years of teaching service. And we've got it spread out based on the schools and where their low income status is. If we look at the total experience, we're adding in external teaching years. So a teacher could have worked at a local school district and then moved here, and we're adding all of those together when looking at the red dots. Does that make sense?
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
What are the 4 high-need
We have not identified which ones. We haven't identified which 4 schools when we're talking about that. We just identified 4.
The next piece we'd want to talk about is an emerging leader track. And this piece and the piece that we're going to talk about right after this, I want you all to know that this is something that is going to take or potentially could take years to build out. These are concepts at this point and not something that we may be able to do as of July 1, 2018. But we want to identify that the district does not have a developed program to grow leaders. So our solution is to create an emerging leader development program supported through a bonus or a stipend to recognize the additional work and time invested to complete this program. And this is to identify a career path into an administrator or emerging leader role. Our annual investment we have is $89,000. And our supporting data shows that 86% of schools across the nation have emerging leader roles. Yet only 32% of the schools provide a specialized training and opportunities for those roles. And MMSD falls under that 32%. and we would like to change that and be under the 86%. We also want to talk about a teacher leader development program. The district does not have a program to develop teachers who want to stay in their teaching profession but take on additional leadership roles. So we would like to create a teacher leader program to support teachers through coaching, training, and conducting professional development. In this annual investment, we list as unknown because we need further time and guidance on where to identify which jobs should be included in this pay band. And with that, we're going to turn it back over to Deirdre.
To talk about money, 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 money. So this is a review of the full schedule and what it would cost to invest in the full schedule. So as you can see, that is a hefty investment of more than $8.5 million. But we felt like it was important to kind of show you as our first pass, this is the estimate that we think if we wanted to fully implement something. I think it's also important to know that as we look at each one of these components, that there are some things that we very specifically think that we could do in year one in terms of implementation, and then others that would take more time to build, right? So emerging leader, teacher leader, and high needs also. So those are areas where we really feel like time is going to be needed to build those out, and that those would not necessarily be ready for a July 1, 2018 implementation. But based on the feedback that we received from the teachers who provided us feedback, steps, curve, lanes, professional development pay bundled, and hard to fill positions as an area are the things that they consistently supported. So if you take a look at those, we're looking at an initial $4.6 million investment if we were to go with those components as a recommendation. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike to just share a little, bring us back to reality. I'm the one that gets to do all of the fun work with my work group team and design the stuff, and Mike has to help us stay in the and share the budget context with us. So we're going to let Mike have a few words about
okay, yeah, and probably just a few words. This is an awful lot to take in as it is. So just a few comments about the larger budget process and how all of this, how this fits in. So, so first, just for point of comparison, when we talk about teacher pay, as we have typically approached it in recent budget years, we've talked about step advancement and lane advancement and some form of base wage or across-the-board percentage increase. Typically, steps and lanes, and maybe a half or 3/4 or 1% on base wage. So, in a typical year for our budget process, you would see the teacher pay component coming in around $4.2 or $4.3 million. Okay, and that's on what was currently $152 million of teacher pay, standard teacher pay. So hopefully that gives you some sense of the proportions here. 4.2, 4.3 million in using our standard approach versus what you have here is a range of compensation options that bring you up to as high as 7.7 million. So about $3+ million, $3.5 million beyond what we would typically do in our budget. If you were to take the entire investment schedule at once. So yeah, so that's the range, 7.7 here versus typically maybe 4.2, 4.3. And this is coming off of current year. The current year was not a typical year. We were able to do more on compensation this year because of the health insurance swing of dollars into pay. So how does this fit in to the overall budget process. I know that you're counting on us to devise a budget process where we can do everything, and we're working on that. But in case we don't come up with that this year, prioritization is still, you know, the name of the game when it comes to this work. So looking at next year, we are relatively certain that we know the revenue picture for next year. We have a range of about $12 to $14 million of additive revenue. It's about a 3.8% revenue increase. It's largely fueled by the community supporting the referendum to exceed. The caveat to that is we have to watch the tax levy. Right? And what drives that is equalization aid loss. So, but revenue, relatively speaking, is fairly well known. Enrollment is expected to be steady next year, which is also a factor in that it drives staffing. So in our thinking early on here, we were asking the question, if we made compensation the lead foot in budget development for all the reasons you've heard, what would it look like, and what would its impact be on those other areas of the budget that would need to be subordinated to this priority? So what you would see here would be some version, ultimately, of this salary initiative, and then you would see us trying to have a complementary strategy around staffing, which you just heard last week about, and obviously there's a bucket full of issues there. And then also some of the other perennials that we deal with, health insurance being one. As you know, we've said that we don't want to put great pressure on health insurance as we have in past years with budget design changes and so on. We're hoping for favorable renewals, of course, but it's not a major point of emphasis for us. So staffing, health insurance, priority actions are always part of the budget, but our first action there is to look for repurposed dollars, and we will do that again. And then obviously there are required budget allowances and contractual increases to deal with. So this will ultimately be a process of prioritization, as it always is, but hopefully that budget framing gives you some sense of the scope of how this this piece fits in.
So it's doable. In other words, these numbers are crazy. I think when I first glanced at them, I thought they might be. So this is within the scope of what's possible, but there are trade-offs and priorities that need to be determined. Should we pass it back to Mary?
Pass it back to Mary.
Okay, TJ.
I've got like some specific questions on different pieces, but a couple early comments. First off, thanks for the work. I think that, there are kind of two pieces, the general concepts and then the details, and the details in a lot of this do matter. So some of my questions on specific things are going to be about details, but conceptually, I think simplifying the curves has some merit. I really, as you probably know, I would like to see the targeted bonuses or pay to higher low-income schools or some other one. I would like to see that to be a bigger piece of this picture. I think that's an effective and important piece. So I would like to see 15 schools as opposed to 4, or I don't know, maybe even 20. But that's there also, and I also appreciate the fact that you're understanding that retention, attracting, and good good morale are more than compensation. That compensation can probably only push that slightly. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing compensation. Right. I'm going to throw one other thing out there, then hit the questions, which is one thing that in terms of compensation, that I was reviewing a lot of really good things from the Learning Policy Institute that I was reviewing over the weekend. And one of the things that jumped out at me was the student loan forgiveness stuff. And not only, that's a national program, right? but maybe we could do something special with it, and maybe we could, you have to have 5 years there before you get the forgiveness, but maybe we could, pay their loans for those first 5 years, and then the forgiveness comes and they pay us back, or whatever, something like that would differentiate us from other people.
Yeah.
And I think that particularly when attracting young teachers, and keeping them, because the two pieces here are, not only do we want to attract teachers, and higher salaries can do that, but we also want to structure these higher salaries in ways that they stay.
That's right.
And so kind of the delayed bonus thing might might work there. And so just something that jumped out at me.
Yeah, we appreciate that feedback. We did hear something similar from our teachers. So really wanting to find this balance between, I want to go ahead and continue my education, but some of them are strapped, and they can't upfront. And so is there a possibility to design something where...
And the other thing, just the take-home piece pay. If you're paying off your loan and you're making $40,000 a year and you have a mortgage, you're going to be looking for the place that's paying $45,000.
Yep.
Because that's going to do it.
Yep.
All right, now into some specific things. I think I'll start with Mike, then kind of work through the other way, because Mike was here.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, TJ, that we pace it so that everyone can have input. I'd say, why don't you take 2 questions?
Well, these are clarifying questions. I don't understand the materials being presented.
Okay.
And if I don't understand the materials, then it's very difficult to.
I know you know and are respectful of everyone's time and everyone's input.
So I will be. These are quite clarifying questions, which is, and I guess I'll start with Mike again, which is, that $7 million, is that a recurring $7 million, or is parts of that not recurring, meaning that the anticipated increased cost per year, 7.7 I think is the number you used.
Mm-hmm.
Just as we have an anticipated 3 point something now, would that be an anticipated 7.7, or would some of it be only one time?
I see this as a one-time lift. Right?
Right.
And then,
But then it recurs.
and then it would revert back to a normal sort of incremental increase, whatever, the typical sort of CPI type of increase. Now, there is some variability in here, and depending on how these play out. So, but I don't want to leave you with the impression that it would be that we would continue to see step increases of $7 million a year. We could never sustain it.
Yeah.
That wasn't.
No.
If you could, kind of, before we see this again, some sense of how much of this is recurrent and how much of it is one time, would be helpful. Similar.
It's all recurring.
Yeah.
It's going to always recur.
It just sort
It
of
just won't be.
levels off. Yeah.
Yes, it builds in and it smooths out.
Well, the base recurs, but how much of the increase recurs is the question. And if you change
Right.
if you change your salary curves, that's going to be different than the current curves we have.
That new curve would be a recurrent curve.
And
It
it's
will
always
be,
higher.
But right now we have a curve that adds about $3.7 million a year. I want to know what these new curves add a year.
Right. If I could express it in percentage terms, we're used to steps, lanes, and base wage combining to be about a 2.7, 2.8% increase in teacher pay. Under this model, you'd see 1 year where it's substantially more, right? But it would then, and that would be built into the base, but then subsequent years would continue, it would revert back to a 2.7, 2.8, 2.85
The 2.8 just
increase
instead of
over
flat,
its
it's
prior
just
year base.
But the
Different
curves have a
value.
different shape than the old curves, and therefore they wouldn't actually, it would be a different. If the curves were exactly the same, then it would be 2.8. If the curves have a different shape, then it's a different number.
Right.
And the curves do have a different shape. I mean, that's.
We can do that.
But it won't be 7.8.
No, it won't be, but it will be
We want
something
somewhere
different.
between.
Could be less.
We can do that for you, TJ.
Well,
Yeah.
it is, though, it actually is every year. It's 7.8 more than if we didn't do this program, plus some type of whatever, depending on the curve, that the 1% increase gets applied to or whatever it is. But actually, it is, every single year, it is that much more than if we didn't make these changes.
Okay, yes. Very quickly, the slide on 31, you divide things by 0 to 10, 0 to 10, 10 to 19, 20 plus years experience. General sense of our workforce, how does that break up by these numbers?
It's about in that same ballpark. If we look back.
1/3, 1/3, 1/3?
No. Our average workforce age, if I can go back there, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it is in there.
42.
So if you think about that, it's probably closer to the 10 to 19 is where our average force is.
But I mean, do we have 30% of our teachers have less than 10% experience? That kind of, how does, do you have a sense of that?
Let me get back to you on
Okay,
that.
all right, that would be great, that would be great. And I guess the last thing is, I'll just ask, is that it seems that bending the curves, that the targeted bends start at about 6 years and then extend some to 15, some to 30, things like that. The selection of, some of them might start at 5, some might start at 7, but it's around there. Can you talk a little bit about that, about why that point to bend it?
Yeah, it is essentially, I mean, we received a lot of feedback on the curves, obviously, as you could imagine. But the initial look at moving the curve up earlier was a very specific recommendation from C&J. It's about people being able to realize their earning potential much earlier. So when you're thinking about those years between like 4 and 10, that's around the time that we're seeing folks leave and turn over, right? So and it's about the time that people are thinking about having families, thinking about buying houses, all of that stuff. So really the idea is to move the curve up earlier so people can realize that potential. Our old curve was all about people realizing that earning potential much later in their tenure, and we're just trying to make that adjustment to support that and hopefully affect turnover. I
do have one more question, and I apologize. On the bilingual and special education targeted, would that be targeted to new hires, or would that be targeted? Nope. Who would that be targeted to?
Everybody who is licensed and teaching in that specific area of focus would be moved and advanced placed in that area. So it's for existing and new, and it's specific to people that are fully licensed. So those that are on a provisional would not be
and that's about
supported.
750, 800 positions, more or less.
Do you have a sense?
It comes out to a little on, what's that?
325 CC and 226
so it's
bilingual.
less than that. So it comes out to about 3,500 per person, something like that, and with understanding that it's different places on the curve, 3,500, 4,000, something like that. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Kate?
So sticking with the curves maybe for a minute, it may just be hard to see in the way that we've done it, but the curves look essentially identical through year almost 10 in some of these, just literally the way they look. So help me understand when they start to diverge. And it might be helpful to literally pull them up, but I mean, the curve you're recommending is 1.1 or 1.0, right?
Yeah.
So this one looks essentially identical till year 6. Is that true?
It is true because when you look at a curve, we are looking at an incremental increase based off of a salary that's $40,000 to $45,000. So it could be increasing at a larger rate, but because their salary is smaller, you see it's a smaller impact to the curve.
So it is actually taking effect earlier. We just can't see it in the picture, is what you're saying.
It would take effect on year 2.
Year 2 through
year 12, and then it slows down.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, look, these are all pretty expensive levers. I'm just curious your take on which of these choices, and maybe the 2 biggest in terms of cost at least, are this curves one and then our high needs areas, right? what would you say is more impactful in terms of solving the problem we're trying to solve? So, you know, the problem of unlicensed and high turnover in areas that we know are high needs and very challenging roles in addition, right?
Yeah.
That's one problem. And then the other is higher turnover in younger years, younger tenure teachers.
So when you're looking at the hard to fill positions, it's a market strategy, right? Like, we are trying to attract people into these positions. We know that bilingual and CC positions are shortage area positions, obviously hard to fill, and we want to be able to be more competitive with the districts around us in attracting folks and hopefully retaining them into those positions, right? When we think about high needs schools specifically, at least from our perspective and the way that we were thinking about it, that is more about outcomes and what students need as it relates to providing that level of stability within.
Yeah, sorry, I just misspoke. I was.
Oh, okay, sorry. So you're talking about.
I'm talking about CC teachers and bilingual.
Got it. So the difference between which curve or hard to fill? Which one
will actually
Which
change the outcome more, right? And maybe we obviously don't know. I'm just kind of curious your take.
Yeah, I mean, they're addressing, I mean, obviously they're in here because it's the feedback that we received from teachers. And so we're obviously wanting to be able to address both of those issues. I feel like as it relates, and Abby would probably be able to speak better to it than I would, if we really had to prioritize, hard to fill positions, I think, would be an area that we would focus and prioritize.
I mean, just kind of looking at the curves, the impact in young years, I mean, that's when folks are having kids, et cetera, and a $400 increase in salary that covers half a month of daycare for one kid, right? I mean, it's great. We should do it, right? And I am supportive of the curves in general. I'm just not sure it's enough, and I'm not sure we could get to a place where it's enough to move the needle on retention, particularly during those years that are really daycare is it's just a massive burden for families.
Agreed.
So that was just kind of thought to what thoughts have you put into in terms of transition plan? Do you want me to stop?
Oh, no.
Well, we do have, because we do have
Yeah,
Dean
that's fine.
and then Nikki, so.
That's fine.
Okay, Dean.
I think I have a simple one. The turnover rates, I can understand the cross-categorical turnover. Don't quite get why bilingual turnover is so high, but how much of the total 6.8 do those two categories make up?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that we have the answer to that question. We can try to dig into it and find the. So let me make sure I'm understanding of the total turnover 6.8.
6.8.
Yep. And you want to know
what's that total? 6.8 of the total.
Oh.
That's about 300.
That's just math. I mean, is there 20% of our teachers ish?
No, 7% of our teachers turn over. That's what you just said.
Yep.
And we've got 4,000.
No, 25.
It's a quarter.
2,500.
At 25.
So 10% is 250. So it's about 200. And of those, I'm curious. So that's, that's 200, and of those, I was just curious as to how many the cross-categorical and bilingual of that 200. How many are those?
Oh, those only gives us percentages.
And well, it's I'm just curious because everyone I think can understand how cross-categorical people can get burnout and they switch.
It has to be a huge,
It's
it's like 100, out of 170.
600 people is about 120 people.
We hired 83 cross-categorical and 48 bilingual this year. And
So
some of
that's
those might
about
be new
120
positions,
out
but
of the
that's the
200
numbers that we
is
hired
those.
as of 10/16, or 10/10, I'm sorry.
So really, we're only losing about 80 teachers on Main Street, and
Less
and
than
the
that.
Yeah.
bilingual and
Yeah.
cross category is about
Yes.
120 a year
Yeah.
out of the 200. So
Yes.
it seems to me our efforts at be really more directed towards cross-categorical and bilingual, and we would be able to
We don't have
dip
to
that
over.
down into the 2% or something, as, you know, keep it similar all across the lane. So so I think, I'm not sure what that means, except that I think we got work to do in support for cross-categorical and support for bilingual. And I'm not certain why bilingual gets turnover unless we get these emergency license and then they don't the next year. We got to keep hiring emergency license people. That might be one reason, but cross-categorical is clearly, there's, you know, we've heard enough over the last several months about the problems with our special ed, being able to support our staff in ways that are sustainable.
Yeah.
So I think that what we've heard leaks into this as well, and compensating them one way is good, but there's a whole bunch of other ways that we've got to support them so that once we hire them, they can continue to stay.
That's right.
And some of those things that TJ mentioned early on, it's not just salary, it's like we got to make sure that they get what they need to do their jobs. So I don't know how you want to approach that, but if we got two identified areas that are the majority of the turnovers, that's where we need to pay attention first.
Could I, Nikki, before we go on, I'd like to stay on the point that Dean has brought up, because I'd like to understand more, because 25% is a huge turnover. Do people come, get a job, then decide, then they realize that other districts close by are paying more money, and they leave? And is this proposal putting us on par in terms of pay with our neighboring districts? Is that what does this number mean?
Can I piggyback on that?
Well, could we actually just answer that question?
Okay.
And then go to yours?
Okay.
Yeah, so yes, Mary, the answer is yes. I think there are a couple of things at play. I think the provisional license piece, quite frankly, there are some folks that are kind of going into that area. They're realizing that might not be an area that they want to focus, and so they're not completing the requirements to get the full license to teach in those particular areas. And we do have other surrounding districts that are being more competitive. And Abby could probably speak to anecdotally, the number of folks that that have called us back and said, I got a better offer at, the local district for these particular positions. So we are competing for those shortage area folks.
Just clarifying, because I'm thinking of the summer pay and how yes, this is the amount, this is what these are paying. So I'm just trying to, I'd just like a firm answer as to whether when this amount of money brings us up to par with our surrounding districts for these positions, or not, or where does it bring us? Because it'd be a lot of money to spend to still be.
The quote I was given was, you can name your price if you have some of these skills.
Can you?
Well, I'd like to, but other districts actually do have a pay scale. It's people aren't, and I'd like to know what this proposal does.
Abby or Rochelle, who wants to take that? And we can do
Rochelle's
our
gonna start.
homework on it too. Would this make
Yeah,
us
that'd be
competitive?
fun.
Homework's good.
Homework, I will take back the part on what other school districts are doing. We know they are advanced placing them, but they're mostly schedules that are not available to the public, that you can find on the website, that you can reach out and say. So we'll have to do some more digging, but we have some really good relationships with the schools, so we can ask specifically what their off-schedule salary schedule looks like.
Okay, great. And then, James, did you have something on that particular point? Because Nikki was next in the queue, but if it's on that
I guess my
question.
only concern is, and it goes back to what Deidre said earlier about, this is a compensation conversation. And my only concern is that, okay, we're talking about turnover, and we need to know, for example, how much is explained, how much turnover explained by salary. And so when we talk about, increasing salaries in the early years to try to get that turnover, well, if we don't know how much of that's explained by salary, I'm not sure, if we can really answer that question. We can raise salaries in the early years, for example, but I think it's what they used to call it in economics, or still do. I think it's highly elastic. I think that you can raise salary quite a bit and not get much of an effect at all. And so we need to know, when we start talking about these salary ranges, how much does it actually explain?
Right. So I would go back just to the point around this being one piece of a larger strategy. So it's important to remember that.
Right.
We don't think compensation alone or increasing this is going to have the sole effect on turnover. We look at this as a full strategy, and there are things that we need to do as it relates to engagement and retention. We think compensation is one of those, but there are other things that we have to focus on.
The point about early compensation is a little bit because that's typically the way compensation is. I mean, what's called the lifetime earnings curve is a bell-shaped curve, and most of your compensation is early in your career. And then you peak out at the top, and then you hit your retirement years and go down. So, yeah, okay, I guess in this case you could say we can raise it some, but every industry, I don't know many places where you work if you don't have early.
Yeah, but that's not how our current schedule is designed, James, which is why we want to change it. It may be typical.
Well, I mean, you make more money as you get your current schedule. Your pay increases with years, right?
Right.
So that's all I'm saying is that's typical.
It's just not bell curved in MMSD.
It peaks out the top.
Okay, Nikki?
Two things. One, I'm emboldened by your comments on the hard to place individuals. We've been hearing for months, and especially the past few weeks, about the need for special education assistance. I mean, we've heard it constantly, and I think I'm hearing from teachers that morale, it's directly affecting morale. From people saying, I don't want to be at work, I don't feel safe there, I don't feel respected there. And I think that plays almost this, I'm not saying it plays the same amount of salary, but it pays a heck of a lot. I do know of a SEA who had an emergency license, which I was told is not coming back. She just said no. And I think that's going to hurt us. Sorry. I think that's going to hurt us incredibly. Additionally, the other thing I worry about, I'm all for new teacher compensation, please don't get me wrong. How do we avoid it on the back of our veteran teachers? How do we make sure that that the salary range will just make it so that way they could still earn a raise if they have over a certain number of years?
Yeah, and I think that was the feedback that we heard, which is why we made the initial adjustment to that curve option, because it's bumping earlier and then bumping again in later years. Initially, the curve recommendation from C&J was really just focusing on those earlier years. So we felt like that was an adjustment that we could make to address that very specific piece of feedback.
So, Deirdre, after this discussion about just how much of how much turnover we have, I mean, actually, we have very, very little turnover outside of those areas, extremely low. And I wonder if actually this is the best way to invest, and that turnover. I was at a conference just last week, and it was the subject was around career change, and that's actually normal across the workforce. I mean, people are just changing jobs and changing careers at a much, much faster pace. And so I just wonder if what we're experiencing, I'm not sure we actually have a problem here. I mean, one thing I think is that we haven't actually talked about a lot that is part of this proposal is that professional development and the fact that right now to move lanes, you need to have advanced degrees that in many cases don't tie to better teaching in the classroom, and that you incur a significant amount of cost, and it's not necessarily helping our students. And so I think it's very interesting to have be looking at changing how you move lanes with regards to other types of professional development that really translate into what the practices in the classroom. James?
Yeah. I think it's worthwhile noting that we all are in favor of increased compensation, regardless of how the compensation may sound or what have you. I don't think anyone in the room here is against increasing teacher compensation. The two pieces for me that I wish was more in the presentation, two words. One is competitiveness. They're very interested to really know as we talk how competitive any of this makes us with the national level and the regional level. And the data isn't here, at least by my observation, to make that determination. So it's been great to be able to determine, and I've always talked about, I think that's really the most important word we can use, is how competitive are we, because we're so close here in terms of school districts that are very good. Another one, I think you just mentioned it, Mary, is academic achievement. How does any of this relate to raising achievement in students? Two very important areas that I think somehow should be connected here as we discuss this data. It seems as though what we're really talking about are ways to raise pay, which is fine. I think we're all in support of it. But it'd be great if somehow it was attached to some probability of raising achievement and increasing competitiveness on a national regional basis.
On James's comment, find it interesting, but I have a question on that, on tying it to achievement. How do we do it? Do we do it on test scores? Do we do it at grade level? Do we do it on who scores the highest on the MAP test? How exactly, or do we do it with the ones who take all the kids that who have the most seniority and take most of the kids who are A students? How do we determine that? I mean, I respect your point. It's an excellent point. I'm just wondering how we do it, and I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it's called administration.
Good point.
Kate?
So, two comments. I think I'm hearing a fair amount of support around investing against kind of those hard to fill areas. I also believe we have a responsibility to think about the whole teacher workforce, and I would agree. I'm not sure we have a turnover challenge. I do think we have heard a lot of voices suggesting that we have some morale challenges, and I have also heard that tied to teacher creativity and autonomy in the classroom a fair amount. So I would be curious, maybe as a takeaway for you, look, that's not something that dollars can solve necessarily, but if it is, if scheduling or curricula or I don't even know, right? I mean, again, this is something that you guys, I think, could do. But if that is something that dollars could be allocated to, I would certainly be interested to understand what would the changes be that we believe would not allow more teacher creativity, more autonomy in the classroom, more letting teachers be teachers, right? What they join the profession to be. Maybe that's more of the kinds of work that's MTI is doing in terms of kind of outside wraparound coaching and mentorship. Yeah. I don't know, but just throw it over the fence.
Yeah, appreciate that comment. And we certainly heard a lot around that when we were doing our work group, our compensation work group last year. And we made a very intentional decision not to have that be a part of this presentation because we were solely focusing on compensation, right? But there was feedback around, and a lot of people above and beyond this idea of increased salaries, people talked about time a lot, and how do we redesign time to allow people to do just that. So we are aware of that. There isn't currently a group that's working on what that might look like. We've kind of, in smaller pockets of groups been having that discussion, but we're really intentional about not having that be part of this focus, because we were really specifically talking about
I think that's
salaries.
fair from a budget wedge perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking an hour a week of extra planning time or whatever, I think knowing what those numbers might be earlier rather than later would be helpful.
Yep.
So that was just point one in terms of what.
Can I stay on that? Because I'd like to, on that point, I agree with Kate entirely, and I think it isn't necessarily an or situation, but in fact, actually, when we come to budgeting, it almost always is. And I would prefer to be talking about, when we talk about especially big numbers like this, about the with morale, because in fact I don't think we have a turnover issue outside of these targeted areas. And last year we took moves to increase our starting pay, so we were attracting, right? So it seems like we've made some big moves that are around that. So so I think the more immediate issue outside of these particular areas are much more around, my concerns certainly are around teacher morale issues and what is happening day to day that's affecting their quality, basically, of their workplace. And I think it should be part of this, because we only have so many resources, and if we're not addressing a retention or a turnover problem, then they might be better spent elsewhere or have more of an impact for teachers. And I just on the high need schools, I'm really glad that you included that total experience, not just the MMSD. I'm surprised that I actually don't think that there's a really strong correlation. And once you take away some of the really low poverty schools, but once you get to where most of them are at 30%, even to the 70%, it's outside of it, it's a pretty narrow range. So to TJ's point, unless you maybe do a lot of schools or we use some other type of criteria, I'm not sure that it's a teacher tenure issue. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing the charts that way.
Some of our
Somebody
highest
said-
Yeah, sorry, I did.
poverties are on,
No,
on
you're good.
the other side of the median.
Yeah.
So the second point was really around kind of other budget big ticket items, right? Just to, again, I know it's kind of early, but look, these would be displacing other priorities for us this year. And I think it is important that we talk about what those other high priorities things are that we might want to throw in. We've talked a lot about behavior this year and relationships. We've talked a lot about kind of mental health earlier in the year. 4K, full day isn't something we've talked about a lot, but I'd like to, right? Like, there's some big items, and I know we're teeing that up. I would love to hear from all of you in another session, right, on how these stack up against those other levers, right? If we're talking about $2 million budget ticket items, let's put all 10 of them down on a piece of paper and talk about what has the greatest impact on achievement and on climate, right? So.
Okay, TJ.
Picking up on a little bit on what Kate and Mary, and actually also what Dean said when you're focusing in on the hard to fill, the cross-categorical and the bilingual pieces. I do think that we need to get, in general, a better hand on, what turnover we are having and what it looks like. And especially I think that 0 to 10, 0 to 10 is a long range. there's a very, very different that to have a first or second year teacher who leaves than a 9-year teacher. That's a very different set of things. So not only the data pointed apart with the cross-categorical and bilingual worked in as Dean suggested, because it does look like about 30% of our turnover is cross-categorical bilingual, but also exit interviews, other things like that would help us understand if there are places where we need to target turnover. And I think that, that I join Mary in being not 100% convinced about that beyond the cross-categorical bilingual piece. What are they? And then how do we target, which goes to the issues of what are the factors in teacher morale, because morale does play into turnover. And also I think that even if morale didn't play into turnover, we don't want unhappy teachers, because they're not good. Unhappy people aren't good at their, they struggle to be there. So, kind of putting that in there. I think that two of the pieces that haven't been discussed are perhaps also part of this, the emerging leaders, if I had some concept of what that actually meant, and certainly the teacher leader position. And I think that teacher leader positions can contribute to retention, morale, and a whole lot of other things. I don't know what emerging leaders are, so I'll be silent there. But I do think that's a place where we could invest some. And I can't remember who I spoke to recently, but I have a couple friends in other districts who, one of them spent 5 years in the classroom half the day and mentoring half the day, and and she loved the job. I mean, she absolutely loved it. It allowed her to do two things she wanted to do, and freed her to have the time to do that. So, repurposing coaches and things like that in that way, reallocation's always good.
My understanding of the emerging leaders is that it's a talent development so that we could grow our own in-building leaders, right? Principals, assistant principals, which I think we do need to have some way to think about growing our own principals instead of always hiring from outside the district. So,
Agreed.
I wondered if we need a little bit more input on some of those items that we didn't discuss. I think we talked a lot about the curve. We talked about the high, hard to fill positions. We talked about the high needs. I wondered about the the other ones. I don't know if you can bring up the slide with the dollar amounts that identify the different areas that you talked about. I want to make sure that you get input for the board that helps. Right, so this is, so the teacher leader does not have any dollar
amounts at this point, right?
I personally like the idea that teachers can stay in the classroom, that they can have a career path. I think the board has talked about this before. So I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads that people would like to see that concept fleshed out. Yeah. Okay. And I think that's really the...
I'd like to see the emerging leader fleshed out. I'm a little skeptical we could do it well for that cost figure. I mean, that's a... I would be really excited to invest in our most talented educators who are interested in going down a principal path. So I'd like to see that fleshed out.
Given how thin the bench is for principal roles, I think it's essential.
And I think it's probably one of the biggest drivers of morale, realistically, is if we could invest in having a really strong bench of principal candidates, that's a fantastic way for our students and our teachers to have great buildings to live in. So.
Without a doubt. I think the thing that you all haven't talked much about is the professional development pay. There was a lot of talk about the curve. Just to clarify for you guys, is it possible to do the professional development pay with a simplified salary schedule without making the big curve change?
Say it again. One more
Can
time.
you simplify the salary schedule, meaning no longer do the half steps, clean up the bachelor's, master's plus, right? So do the simplification add the professional development pay component,
Yes.
because you can't do the simplification without the professional development pay. As you mentioned, the teacher said that those have to be a package. Can you do those things without making the changes to the salary curve?
Yes,
Seems like you could.
yes.
So I'm just, just as we think about options, because the professional development pay, in part, is getting to your thought, Mary, about just simply getting more credits. Is it necessarily supporting a teacher in what they want to learn?
Or what we need
developing
them.
their skills in
Right.
the areas in which we need.
Right.
That's right.
I mean,
And I think the professional development pay idea, that column of a future salary schedule would be about incenting the skill development in areas where we need it most, which I think has a lot to do with achievement. And I think it has a lot to do with morale too. I mean, getting to learn the things that you,
Well,
as
that
an
you
individual,
know.
want to develop.
Yeah, I mean.
So I just wouldn't want that to get lost in the curve conversation.
No, I think we saw that people were very interested in that.
I think we are pretty clear on what our homework is. I mean, I know when our senior team had this similar discussion, the hard-to-fill positions was where we were focusing a lot of our energy. When a hard-to-fill position goes unfilled in a school, it's hard on everyone, right? It affects the entire staff. So we, Abby actually spoke really well to this point when we had our meeting. And so I think we would love to flesh out not just the compensation part of that strategy, but the multi-pronged approach to get more qualified people in those roles, including developing a pipeline. We've already been in discussion and already have started to move with the UW on what they can do through our Forward Madison partnership as an example to make sure that we've got more staff capable of getting the licensure that they need to be successful in those positions. So again, it's not just about compensation, but I think that particular area we'll work on fleshing out in more detail.
Yeah, Laura and then Nikki.
I just wanted to ask something really quickly because I don't know if this would cost like any money.
Yeah.
But in terms of, it was said at the very beginning, like it was the goal to have all positions filled by July 1st, and so I don't know when that would like send out offers. But I know that I have lost 2 excellent student teachers from the UW-Madison secondary program because they got offered first before MMSD, and MMSD did offer them a job, but they had already taken it because it was so close to the summer, and they both had to move and to do their new job. So I think that is a big part of the competitive aspect that James, you were talking about, because those were, those people could have been like the best. They were super high energy and really loved teaching, and we just didn't snag them first.
That's right.
So I think that that would definitely also go to boosting achievement.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because we have been working specifically on our student-teacher program, right? Like in years past, we haven't done a real good job of being really comprehensive and understanding who is in our schools, and how do we know who they are, how do we connect with principals and understand who our high flyers are, and provide those early offers to them. So I appreciate that as a comment, and we've continued to do our work. We've actually kind of redesigned how it is that we interact with principals, and knowing specifically who is in buildings and classrooms, and we're continuing to do that work to provide those offers earlier. So thank you for that.
I don't know if this is a Jen question, a Deidre question, so I'm just going to ask it. On licensure, the state law changed to allow no student teaching through a specific program called ABDC, or it could be, I'm horrid with acronyms. And it would require a bachelor's degree, $2,200, and 10 months of training, and then you automatically got your license. and that was just signed into the budget. My question is MMSD some schools have said they're going to hire those teachers, some say that they're not. Do we have a plan on whether or not we're going to hire those teachers?
I just want to make sure that we do stay on topic because we still have, is that something we can get back, you can
Yeah,
get back to
I'm
us
just
on?
curious.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There were some other provisions in the state budget that we can, certainly HR related. I think
I just didn't
we-
know
we
when
have-
to ask it.
Great, okay. Well, it sounds like we are ready then to go on to our next agenda item. Is that true, or was there more to?
We are at the end.
Okay.
You did your discussion. I'm assuming that was the discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing to say, obviously, we appreciate the feedback. Very, very helpful for us. And as we continue to kind of build out this work, we have a work group and folks that we're continuing to engage in this process. So we will continue to work with those folks. And Michael, tell us when we're coming back to share updates with you.
I think our goal was that in December, we'd come back with some kind of follow-up thoughts on both of the conversations that we've had on staffing and compensation, because in December, we're actually really beginning to kick off the budget process in earnest. We're moving beyond the pre-budget phase into serious budget planning. And I think I would just also add that, I mean, just to reiterate that this was meant to be a conceptual presentation, right? Like, where is there real interest in digging in more before we go off and do the work? And I think we got a clear signal from the board on where you want us to dig in more, so I appreciate it. Yeah,
December
thanks to you guys.
operations.
December
Yeah, very cool.
operations.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, everyone.
So we are next going to jump into the Human Resources report around the affirmative action plan, and this is in preparation for a proposed action item for the November 27th board meeting.
So just briefly, in your packet for today, you have both the Human Resources report, which is a report known by many names, but it does include the attrition data, the affirmative action goals and the movement over the last several years, and then embedded within the context of the more detailed and nuanced demographic breakdowns, as well as the other questions that the board has asked. You also have a red line version of the affirmative action policy, which is its third at bat. And our goal with these changes was to provide updated data at this point, because it's been prolonged at this point, but also to really clearly articulate where the affirmative action plan lives within the context of all of our other data related to human resources and our hiring goals. So at that, I'm available for any questions that are still pending.
James?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you for adopting that change in terms of distinction between teachers and what was the other category that was originally merged with. I think it's, at least it's very important for some of the people that I speak with to be able to speak specifically about the classroom teachers that we have. The only suggestion I would make is, you know, I think this table on page 10, I think that's the best table that we have in terms of our affirmative action and HR reporting, because it really gets at the actual raw data, the numbers, and you can actually see, you know, who we have, how many teachers we have of like race and gender, what have you. My only suggestion would be, I think we should. Well, one of the things I wanted to do was to confirm some of the statements in these reports. That is, that we are doing better with our population of color. And I mean, I must admit, as you all know, it's not a favorite term of mine. Population of color. It's sort of like percentages. And when you use those things, you can hide so much. Not that you do it intentionally. But a 10% increase could be the hiring of one person, for example. So it's always, you always have to realize that when we talk about percentages and populations of color, we may have increased hiring these populations of color, but within that we may have some that are declining. So my suggestion would be that I think that we should have two tables. One table here that's let's say 2012, and then the current year, and that way we can always verify that what those statements are, what they're saying. Because I wanted to go in and look at that, and I was not able to because this is just a point estimate, and if I had both time frames, I would be able to talk about some of the groups and how they're actually doing under the larger umbrella of communities of color. And so thanks again for separating out the teachers and all. My only other suggestion at this point would be to have two tables in here.
The next page does have 2011 and 2017, but it's a different breakdown. I would love to have them. Is it also going to be so that on mine the page is cut off, the table is cut off?
It's just because it's the red line version.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
except all
Yeah. Okay.
cleaner.
Easier to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Other TJ?
I went back and looked at the 2011 because similar concerns, and I didn't look for it for all categories, but I did look for the African American category, and we went from African American teachers, black teachers. We went from 2.6% to 3.6%. An increase, also raw numbers, I think was 17, but I remember the percentages. I didn't remember it, which is buried in that of color category or minority category. And I guess, which is, I understand that the federal government uses this category. I'm still not sure why we don't use more specific breakdowns in addition to it.
Because the purpose of an affirmative action plan is a very specified purpose, right? And it is not to create hiring quotas in that, right? It's to look at taking affirmative actions to undo historical underutilization within the workforce. And so the risk is setting very specific hiring numbers in very small groups and running the risk of establishing what appears to be a quota.
It keeps us from getting sued.
But I think monitoring. I think monitoring by those is, and I don't think that that historically that the category of minorities is a relevant historical category. I don't think that there is a historical underrepresentation of Filipinos based on our community's makeup historically. So I think that actually is.
I mean,
I understand how the federal government does it. I don't know why we can't do it differently.
Then I just think it is something other than a capital A affirmative action plan. And it could be a diversity hiring plan, right? But those are defined terms as far as a federally defined affirmative action plan, which is what our policy says we want to have, whether required or not by law.
And we're not required.
Right, and we're not. But so I don't say that there's not value, but it's not a capital A, proper noun affirmative action plan, because these are the categories that the Department of Labor and the federal government has said is what you use to find availability within the workforce and create an affirmative action plan. And so that's why we've tried to really intentionally embed the affirmative action plan within where it rests within the district, which is one component of our human resources, goals, and hiring opportunities.
Okay, I do want to.
TJ made a point. He said he compared 11 to 17. I just want to ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you compare 11 and 17 in the teacher category? Because that's what the issue was.
I melded them. I did it.
You did. You changed.
Yeah. I combined them.
How were you able to do that?
Well, they were all in one category before, and they're split out. So I added up the ones that are split out now.
Okay, so I do want to stay on topic here. We're not going to, because this is the third time that it's coming to us. It's coming to a vote at the end of the month. Are we really still going to talk about why this is and for what's in this plan and what is not versus this is basically what we have in front of us. And I have not heard from the previous discussions that we are saying we want a completely different type of thing. I think what, TJ, is the point?
Well,
What are you
then weren't listening to
proposing then?
previous discussions, because the last time I said that I would like one that has targeted goals based on specific race, not the minority category, and also has data which we don't have, which is data about what is the availability based on these subcategories. We have availability based only on minority, not these subcategories. And I did say that previously, both times it was before us. And so, and I'm saying it again, and I will vote against this as a plan because if it's not there. And that's, because I don't understand why it's not there. We're not required to have, if we're required to have a federal affirmative action plan, then we would have to follow the federal rules. We define this ourselves. So I'll vote against it, and that's that. But I did say it each time.
John?
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out, for whatever it's worth, just a reminder, and we talked about this at the last couple of discussions, that there's the affirmative action plan, and then there's the HR report, and the goals that HR sets that, as you saw tonight in Deirdre's presentation, are more aggressive than those targets in the affirmative action plan. And we can certainly talk to Bo about this, but on, gosh, these pages are numbered, page 1 of the HR report has it broken out in great detail by demographic group down to African American male, African American female, both no, the actual numbers, percentages, which is different. I'm not talking about that. I'm just reminding you that that data is specified by both percent and number. And if you wanted a comparison graph, both in percentage and number, we could probably figure out a way to add that. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to get it, the numbers and the grid that you're looking for, James, and that might be
No, I'm not.
the way
What
to do
I'm thinking
it.
pretty simple. I don't think we have an issue with what I'm asking.
But this chart would be.
It's a lot more complicated, and I've seen what he's asking for, and that has been incorporated into we incorporated into in our day job. We incorporate that information into our affirmative action report, the stuff that he's asking for. So I do understand exactly what he's asking for.
Given that this is something we are choosing to do, I kind of feel like if we're going to spend time on it, that it should also provide leadership for us. I mean, this is something we've said we want to be leaders in. And so, I mean, just very tactically, I wonder if it isn't possible to add into our job group teachers availability of African American teachers and the raw statistics there. It would be one ad. I think it's the highest.
I think it would be ill-advised to do a single demographic category. I think you are then.
Okay, so then
without
if you did more detail for just the teacher category for all of our, do the same.
I mean, to do a single racial category, I think would be the most problematic.
Yes.
And quite frankly,
fair.
because of where this how this data is available, I mean, it's cut with the intent of creating affirmative action reports. So the availability is available using these federal stats. So I don't know if availability data to that degree is even available, because the whole purpose of its availability is affirmative action plans, which are minorities and gender. I mean, it's that bigger category. So I can't make any promises because I literally just don't know if that, like, census information, the way we gather it's available. And I can ask with Eric, but I think I caution you again that that is very different than a capital A affirmative action plan. There are reasons affirmative action plans are designed to do what they do, and there is risk associated, and it is just something different than an AA plan.
Nikki?
don't mean to disagree with the group, but I got to go with Dylan on this. As an attorney, the one thing you learn is you've tried to avoid getting sued, avoid getting sued, avoid getting sued. The one thing the federal government has said time and time and time again is quotas are always going to be unconstitutional. They are always going to be found as suspect because they require what's called strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of scrutiny. I think legally we're on thin ice if we do it. That's my legal interpretation, and it does kind of concern me.
I'll make one more. Although I agree with TJ, I think that would be good information to have. I do think it's a very heavy lift, and I don't know if Dylan has the resources to do it. Because on the federal level, it was done by an entire department of the EEOC. And so with a national survey and all, I don't know if that data is available. I don't know. And so it would be a very heavy lift to put that in. In terms of the suing thing, we live in a suing culture and we sue for everything, so that never really bothers me.
We're gonna knock on wood, we're batting 1,000.
Something that's just so obviously easy to get sued. What we're talking about here is just simply having some numbers of availability. So that's just not really a quota issue. So I agree that it'd be great to have the information, but on the other hand, I think it's a very heavy lift and don't know something we can do.
Dylan, do you want to comment on that?
It's a heavy lift.
Yes. I mean, I think yes to kind of everything. We've had these. I dug up the report James been and scoured it so that we could have an informed discussion about it. Again, I don't know that the capacity exists. I don't know that the number exists, and I think I advise against it, but that's why I get to not make decisions.
Different topic.
Well, TJ, I would like to be able to provide direction here. I mean, this is the third time. I think we should be absolutely clear what we want on this.
One additional year, 2017 and 11. I think she's agreed on it.
And 2011, is that whatever? Because the other one is, that was the previous report.
So 11 and then the current year. That way we can always substantiate what's actually happening.
And to clarify, I think just to go up one page, it's that numerical report from one page up.
From that one.
I don't think I'm driving.
I think Barb's got it.
Yeah,
look at that one.
I think that's the
So, right, so this is current numbers. What was the, yeah, I see what you're
I think
saying.
that's 17 or something. What year is that?
Current.
Mm.
So,
And the most detailed table is in the HR report, not this one. I just have to say it again. This is the most glorious table that we have on our HR data. Page 1 of the HR report. A comparison before to now on this would give you everything you could possibly dream of in terms of our comparison.
Except for the availability
Which
information.
is different from the availability.
Not disagreeing, but this is, we're talking about the affirmative action report now.
Yep.
So this to make the affirmative action
This
report
need to be
very good. All I'm suggesting is, and I think we have agreement that we just put one additional table.
Yep.
So not disagreeing that one is.
Okay, so James, I understand where you're, Nikki, I think you're clear, you are fine with how it is. Kate, do you want to provide specific
feedback?
Right, do require to have, outside of the change that James has said about adding the table for a comparison purpose, is this something that's in a form that you can vote for?
I would like to stop spending time on this because I am not sure it's going to do what I think you're hearing from many people we hope it to do. I would like to request that we get, if we could, on a different timeline, get the availability information to the degree that it is available. I believe it is available.
Mm-hmm. So maybe incorporate that type of information in the HR.
Or in just a weekly update or something. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important information for us to understand how we are trending and what our pool of potential candidates is.
Okay. Okay, and I'm coming around to you,
that's
TJ.
all right, I just wanna
Dean,
make
you haven't spoken on this.
No,
Are
no,
you?
I think James' suggestion shouldn't be difficult to add.
Okay.
Move on from there.
And you'd be fine with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a question that may lead to specific guidance, and it may not. Different geographic divisions were used for different job categories in terms of availability. And for the teacher category, the state was used. Do we know if the metro area teacher category would have produced a higher target or a lower target?
What was the question, TJ?
I got lost.
The different job categories for food service we used metro area. For administrators we use national. For teachers we use state. And my question was whether the minority availability metro area is greater than minority availability state. And if it is, I would suggest that we use the metro area.
Kind of killed in the average of the state. I think it is
I don't know
actually
the answer.
lower, but I will verify that because I am I believe Eric did both and also looked at our true recruitment strategies to have one that best aligned.
Right.
But I think it was lower, but I will verify that.
I think if we can know that before that, and you get what I'm getting at here, that I would like the higher number of the two.
Yes, to not
and they're both
artificially deflate the availability to make it appear we're doing better.
Yes.
Well, I'm not saying inflate of it. I'm just
No,
I
right,
would like
but
the higher of
use
the
a
two. I would like
realistic.
our goals to be set higher.
That is fair.
That's all.
No, that's fair.
And they're both legitimate. I mean, they're both
Yeah,
choices.
That's
so.
fair. That I hear.
That's it.
Okay.
I will not do the math. I will have Eric do the actual math because I
Yeah.
keep messing it up. But yes, I will look at it. Okay. I'm going to leave now.
Yes, that would probably be a good idea. Okay. So that is the last item on our agenda. So is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn the meeting?
Okay, Nikki, second.
Second.
Kate, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.